Metro Louisville is made up of 26 districts. This podcast gives you a chance to connect with your council member and learn about what's going down in your district. Welcome back to District Download. I'm so excited for this episode. We're just going to jump and launch straight into it. We don't need too much of an introduction for who we have today because he's someone who you've already heard before in previous episodes. We have Councilman Jecorey Arthur from District 4 with us. Welcome back.
Peace.
And then you have a very special guest. Would you like to introduce your special guest who is new to our table here?
I have someone who's more important to the district than I am, and that is the legislative assistant, Brianna Wright, who does so much for the office, with the office, and she can elaborate on that a little bit more if she wants to.
Thank you so much.
Round of applause for all the LAs, because I think you actually bring up a very nice point that we should highlight. Each district has a legislative assistant or some form of a staff to go with that office. And working here, I know firsthand how hard you guys work because you're the ones that are pulling in all the phone calls, doing so much of the backgrounding, but not many people know who you are. So again, thank you from all of us that do rely on you for each and every single district. So thank you. And I'm so glad to have you here at the table.
Thank you.
So let's also, before we dive straight into the awesome topic you guys have on today, which is civic engagement, let's go ahead and just recap for people who may not have heard your first episode, Jecorey. Go ahead and explain District 4 to people, give a reference point of who and what and where you represent.
Metro Council District 4 is downtown Louisville and surrounding neighborhoods. So as far west as the Parkland neighborhood all the way up to 32nd Street, we go across Parkland, we get into the Russell neighborhood where I proudly live. We got a little small corner of the Portland neighborhood. We go across the Central Business District downtown. We go across there and we get on the other side into Butchertown. We also go into the Phoenix Hill neighborhood. We got parts of Clifton Heights. South of Broadway, we have parts of Smoketown. We also have parts of Old Louisville. We have the California neighborhood. We have about 10 different neighborhoods that touch District 4. And I would always say it's the heart of Louisville. And it's everything that's right and everything that's wrong with Louisville. Right in terms of us featuring so many historically black neighborhoods like Russell, Smoketown, California, and being on the right side of civil rights over the course of our existence in this city and in this country. And then everything wrong. You know, you have so much disenfranchisement that happens in our district, from unemployment to people not having access to their basic needs such as housing and food. And being disenfranchised means that you're going to not necessarily be engaged in government or in policy work, which is part of what we'll be talking about today, civic engagement, which really just means being involved in decision-making about your city.
So let's launch into it. You already kind of got us started. What is civic engagement to you?
So I like a definition that the American Psychological Association uses. So we'll talk about what civic engagement is. I'll share that definition. But beyond that, we'll also talk about why it's important. And then we'll talk about how we can be better. And when I say we, I don't just mean the people listening, voters, constituents. I mean Metro Council as well, anyone and everyone. I've always said that everyone in Louisville is responsible for Louisville. And when I say everyone, there are no exceptions at all. That means every single person has to be politicized and has to be engaged in some way, whether that's a little bit or a lot of bit or in between. So we'll frame the conversation around those three questions. What is civic engagement? Why is civic engagement important? And how can we get better at civic engagement? So what is civic engagement? The American Psychological Association defines it, and they say that it is individual and collective actions designed to identify and address issues of public concern. It goes on to say that it can take many forms, from individual volunteerism and organizational involvement to electoral participation. It can include efforts to directly address an issue work with others in a community to solve a problem, or interact with an institution of representative democracy, aka government. Civic engagement encompasses a range of specific activities. You could work in a soup kitchen, serve on a neighborhood association, write letters to elected officials. There are so many different examples of civic engagement, but we like to focus on a group of examples that really impact our work more than anything else. And that will include some of what you just heard, but we'll also elaborate on that. So we'll just focus on 10 main examples of civic engagement and then kind of just lay those all out on the table and build from there. So we have examples like voting,
Neighborhood associations,
writing letters to government officials,
volunteering for a nonprofit that has a mission,
getting people registered to vote,
showing up to government meetings,
serving in government,
giving feedback to government,
being subscribed and engaged in city news,
joining advocacy groups.
And some of these definitions of civic engagement, like I said, in its simplest form, we're just talking about being involved in government, which means being involved in politics. Some of the definitions might say political and non-political actions. In my opinion, everything is political. Even if we're talking about volunteering for a nonprofit, you volunteering for that nonprofit and having the capacity to volunteer could be tied to the capacity in your life and what you are able and not able to do, because you got to work extra hard, 2, 3, sometimes 4 jobs to maintain a life for your family, which is very much so anchored in political issues. That volunteerism and you being engaged in that nonprofit might be funded by a government institution or department or agency. That is political. The road you drive on, the conditions of that road, that is political. The conditions of your housing, that is political. Our kids being able to go to school safely and come back home at the end of the day, it's all political. So I would argue anything and everything is political, but when you look up civic engagement on the internet, there might be all of these different examples of what that means. And like I said, some might say it's political, some might say it's not political, but I believe that absolutely everything in the United States of America, fortunately or unfortunately, some might think, is political. I'll also preface before we get into these examples and why they're important and how we can get better at them. For some reason, we have been taught to believe that only politicians should be political. And the analogy I like to think of as a musician, I'd like to just always remind people that would be like only me and other musicians being involved in music, listening to music, making music, having an opinion about music. That would be like a mathematician being the only person who can do math. That would be like a cosmetician being the only person who can apply makeup. I think we believe that only politicians should be involved in politics, partly because they get paid for it. But your dentist gets paid, and I hope that you still brush your teeth every day, hopefully twice. And I think of politics the same way. We got to work on our political health from day-to-day actions, not just when we're in crisis, when somebody gets shot by the police. We have to be engaged in politics day to day. Like I said, even if it's a little bit, a lot of bit, or in between, you have your extremes. So let's kind of go back through those 10 examples and talk about why they're important. Some of these will be obvious, and some of these we'll try to point out some things that don't really go noticed. They don't really get discussed a lot. So with voting, I think a lot of folks think that's like the one way to be absolutely engaged in politics. You vote, and then you go home and yell at your TV in between elections because something is happening. I personally never knew why voting was so important. I was kind of just told that voting was important. I didn't necessarily understand how to do my own research or have an understanding of why it was important until I realized the people that we elect are elected and have the responsibility and the power to make all of these decisions that impact our everyday lives. An example would be former President Donald Trump. Like him or hate him, love him, dislike him, doesn't matter. He was hired to be the president because people voted for him. Majority people voted for him. and we could talk about the electoral process and how that majority in itself is problematic. But he was hired. And on the flip side, he was also fired. That is the power of voting and why voting is important. You get to put people in office to represent you. You can also look at someone who had a historical election, love him or hate him, former President Barack Obama, who, because of who he was identity-wise, being the first black president, his election resulted in the highest voter turnout for black voters, for young voters, both times hired by the people of the United States of America. Your vote is so essential, is so important. Even zooming into Kentucky, our General Assembly, overwhelmingly a majority Republican, super duper majority Republican General Assembly. They were hired by their constituents, by people there. And we'll talk about disenfranchisement and how that plays a role in certain people getting elected. But like it or dislike it, they were elected by people, voting as an example of civic engagement. Serving on a neighborhood association. You know, that's an example that sometimes we don't think about as being political. But when we make neighborhood plans, which are really policy documents to shape how that neighborhood is going to be over the years, we use those plans to help us make decisions in government. And if you aren't involved in a neighborhood association, which is really the only group of residents, the only body of residents that represent your area or that should represent your area, it's almost like you don't exist. You know, a group of businesses, the owners might not necessarily live there. Their clients might not necessarily live there. Even a church, your constituents at the church might not live in that neighborhood, but a resident association, a neighborhood association, that should be a group of people, and really the only group of people who are invested in that neighborhood as stakeholders because they actually live in that place. Writing letters to government officials. This is really important because otherwise, I would say if we don't hear from constituents about issues, I'm in that city hall chamber guessing on what's important for our constituents. If they don't share with us, if they don't let it be known, and when I say writing letters, I mean more so like you can write a letter, you can hit us up on social media, you can comment on social media posts. Writing letters is really essential, or writing or communicating with elected officials is essential. And Brianna gets so much of that communication from her end, just picking up that phone on a day-to-day. You know, she's in the office full-time talking with people, and, you know, she can elaborate on what she hears from constituents more than I can sometimes. But if we don't hear from constituents, like I said, it's almost like we're just guessing and shooting in the dark if we're not doing our own research on that and going out to reach them and hear from them and kind of force them to give us that input. Nonprofits, of course, that's also a way you can be civically engaged. Of course, if you're volunteering with a nonprofit, you probably care about their mission. You care about what they believe in. You care about what they're trying to accomplish. And in some cases, nonprofits deliver services that government doesn't have the capacity to do, doesn't have the expertise to do. We give them money, your tax dollars, in most cases, to deliver services that we cannot provide for whatever reason, or to help enhance and supplement the services that we do provide. Getting registered to vote, obviously going back to the reason you vote in the first place, more people being involved in deciding who gets to represent them, hopefully means that that representation is going to be more reflective of the community that person is elected or selected to represent in office. Showing up to government meetings, going back to communicating with your elected officials, you can help influence decisions that get made in government. I don't care if that's the council members meeting or if a department head has a meeting, elected or appointed or anything in between. You have to show up to those meetings to let it be known what your concerns are, or to let it be known what you support, because it's easy to talk about what we don't want. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to articulate what we do want. Of course, you can also serve in government directly, and that doesn't necessarily mean being a council person. It could mean that, but it could mean, you know somebody who is unemployed or underemployed. LouisvilleKY.gov. We always hiring folks. We got a long list of jobs that are available. I think it was a philosopher by the name of Kanye West who once rapped, "If you can do it better than me, then you do it." And to me, that's really just saying, if you don't like the way that Public Works is operating, and you know somebody who could work in Public Works and do it better, hey, come work for Public Works. Come do the job that you think that they should be doing. Get engaged in government to the level where you could actually serve in government. And I also think when you serve in government and you get a different perspective of how this thing works, it'll change you as a citizen, and it'll just take you to the next level when it comes to how to engage with government. Giving feedback, an example of that might be the American Rescue Plan. We got direct feedback from constituents about what we should prioritize with your money. And I'm glad to say, because of that direct feedback, we were able to turn around and then fund the highest priority, which was housing. I'm also proud to say we were able to fund housing at a higher level than other cities across this country. Cities that are dealing with houselessness at a much higher rate than we are, we were able to put most of our funds towards housing, even when they did not. Being subscribed to City News, this means not only being subscribed to our newsletter, you can also get updates about planning and zoning. You can also help prevent confusion and chaos sometimes, because when you get the official press release or the official word, you can get in front of rumors, you can get in front of gossip and let it be known what is actually happening. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked about the property along West Broadway at 18th and Broadway and what is happening with that site, the old almost passport site. That information has been put out so many times. So how can we better subscribe to news, but then also, of course, share that news? And then last on our examples, we talked about joining advocacy groups. This could be your neighborhood association, but it could be something else. It could be a group that's solely based on, political work, policy work, advocacy work. And when you join those types of groups, when you join other voters and constituents, you're building power. And we'll elaborate on building power a little bit later, but it's really important to build that power, because the more people you have, the more power you have. And the more power you have, the more influence you can have to change something that you want to see changed. More specifically, what Dr. Martin Luther King called the three evils, which is addressing issues around poverty, issues around racism or any form of discrimination, and then militarism, which is really violence and harm that is caused to folks. So, those are really just really surface level reasons of why those examples are important, but we got to get into how we can do them better. And before we get into that, do you have anything to add around why some of those different examples are important?
Mainly what I would add is that getting involved with those examples helps people be less ignorant and helps there be less confusion on our end when they contact us or when they do try to get engaged with us.
Yeah, that goes to your point of, stopping the rumors before they happen, and being in on those neighborhood meetings to the council meetings and seeing how that process works. And I think you said at one point, that gives you the perspective of knowing how that works and therefore what you can do moving forward if you want to see a change, or simply better understanding so that you know how to pass that information forward.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about how every month we get these 311 reports. Mm-hmm. Metro Safe non-emergency services. People call 311, or you can submit it online. Those reports are really telling, because we're looking at 600, 700, 800, 1,000 different requests by our constituents, because we only get District 4 reports, and what they're reporting about. Now, a lot of people that I come into contact with don't know what 311 is, unfortunately. But even the fact that we have almost 1,000 something requests in 1 month from the people who do know what 311 is, I think it goes to show how necessary and needed government is, because government is handling so much around the city. But if you don't know what 311 is, or you don't know how to file reports with 311, what you'll usually do is what? You'll call us. And then when you call us and we got to navigate 311 for you, when it's something you can easily do for yourself, it creates a traffic jam at the District 4 office. which is really, people don't like to hear this, but really designed on the legislative branch of the government to work on public policy, aka law. That is essentially what our power is, our responsibility is. Almost 800,000 people in the merged city-county government. And we, Metro Council members, are the only 26 people who can pass public policy, who can vote on public policy. There are 26 of us out of almost 800,000 people. So when you call some of the people who are responsible for passing policy and you take us away from that job, from that power, from that responsibility that we have and we were elected to do, you know, I said traffic jam, but it really just creates this domino effect. When our district is overwhelmed with issues that we got to address through policy, you know, it really just kind of gridlocks us overall in the services that we can provide and the policy that we could work on. I hate to admit this, but I might go weeks without being able to work on that policy because I'm chasing around some of these constituent services and doing follow-up calls with departments and doing so much back and forth with folks. But constituents can really help us with understanding how 311 works. 211 works, which is even less known. Social services. You need help with rent. You need help with getting access to employment, training. Social services, 211. We all know 911, emergency services. 311, non-emergency services, and 211, social services. So please share that far and wide with folks. So how can we do this better? We already got into that conversation a little bit. But let's kind of go through those examples again. And please jump in, shut me up, and elaborate on anything as we work through these examples. And we'll start with voting. We'll go back to voting. As I said, I didn't know how important voting was, partially because I didn't know the people we were voting for, what they were responsible for. And that's on those elected officials. That's also on constituents, the voters. That's on anybody and everybody you can think of who's ever voted and been engaged in the political process. Why did I have to become an adult to know what a city council person is responsible for? That's unfortunate. And we still talk to adults. I'm talking age 60 plus who are still unaware what a city council person is responsible for. So when you vote, voter education is so key, because if I'm voting and that's my level of engagement, civic engagement, political engagement, it's far from enough, but also your vote has to be educated. You have to cast an educated vote because you want to make sure you're voting for what you believe in, to be right, against something that you believe to be wrong, just versus unjust. It's not enough to be in a basketball game and shoot and say, I scored a point. Which hoop did you shoot in? And I almost think of voting in the exact same way. It's really important. Even when we campaigned just in 2020, so many voters, we knocked on that door, and there would be this level of what people call identity politics. Are you a Democrat? Okay, I'll vote for you. Oh, you're black? Okay, I'll vote for you. That is very dangerous because we get caught up in labels. We get caught up in the surface level of what somebody looks like as opposed to digging deeper into what their policies are. So, you know, I think it's important to practice identity politics, especially for Black Americans, because we've been oppressed in this country over 300 years out of the almost 400 something years that we've been here because of our identity. So to a certain extent, identity has to be essential to why we cast that vote. We just got to make sure we go beyond pigmentation and have an understanding of legislation. So what is the policy? What is the plan? What is someone going to do once they actually get into office? That is really important. And that's policy. And if a candidate doesn't have a plan for that, that's an opportunity for you as a voter to say, well, this should be the plan, and then get them to earn your support.
I was going to say making sure that you're voting with intention, and to go to your basketball analogy, not only are some people, in my opinion, shooting at the wrong basket, they're actually there when the game's over and on the soccer field holding a basketball. So a lot of the times, I think a lot of people are not voting thinking. I just think they're just voting to vote because they think it's important. And if, as Councilman Arthur said, if you're going to just vote, do it well. So if that's the only way you're going to engage, make sure you know what you're talking about and you're well-versed in what you're actually voting on.
Yeah, I'll even like go to a specific example. The judge that signed the warrant that led to Brianna Taylor getting killed is on the upcoming ballot. And if you don't know her name and you don't have an understanding when you go into that booth, you essentially vote for the person who led to Brianna Taylor getting killed, which we know masses of people in 2020 really cared about. So voter education is so essential, because if you don't do that when you go into that booth, you can actually cause so much harm for folks, which leads us into some of the other examples, like serving with groups. So with a neighborhood association, I said earlier, it's the only group of actual residents that you're going to be working with to address issues. You know, you're closest to the problem, you're closest to the solution. What better group to represent where you are than the residents themselves? We have monthly roundtables with our constituents every third Tuesday from 6 to 7 p.m. It's always the same stream on Facebook, Louisville Metro District 4. It's always the same link to video in. It's always the same number to call in every single month. And when we think about neighborhood groups, you know, your groups meeting by themselves and having autonomy is really important, but representation of those neighborhoods is important as well. So if you don't have a lot of people in your group, you don't have a lot of capacity, which means you might not have the time or the space or the energy to show up for those monthly roundtables. And we don't ever have every single neighborhood represented, but we're working on that. We're working on creating an advisory council where we know there's a designated group of people to represent those 10 neighborhoods to show up. But even outside of that, you know, outside of us incentivizing people to show up, what does it look like for those 10 residents from those 10 neighborhoods? And I'm just saying one resident at least to show up and make sure when we're discussing policy directly with constituents, your neighborhood is represented. That is so important, because the residents don't always realize this, but they have the power. They have the power. Each council district, all 26 of us, have roughly 30,000 constituents in each district. 30,000 of you, one of Brent Ackerson. 30,000 of you, one of Anthony Piagentini. 30,000 of you, one of Cindy Fowler. 30,000 of you, one of me. And you clearly have a majority, but I don't think we understand the power in those numbers being the majority, which means being the power. We don't understand, I forgot who said it, but we don't understand that the power of the people is stronger than the people in power. It wasn't a politician that abolished slavery or abolished segregation or abolished any of these evils that our country has faced. It was masses of people who came together and fought back on all of those evils to actually change them. And I'm using extreme examples, but we can talk about the neighborhood plans and how they're executed. We can talk about policy that the Metro Council deliberates. Anything that we're working on, any decision that we're making, people have the power. People power is so strong, but we don't always know we have it or know how to use it. On the flip side to you know, thinking about residents groups, neighborhood associations, it's important that they are inclusive. Because when you show up to represent your neighborhood, if you have a diverse neighborhood, you know, age-wise, race-wise, gender-wise, every other-wise, and that's not reflected in how you engage with the council office or congressional office or representative or senator's office, then it becomes like really narrow in the focus. It becomes really narrow in what you're trying to represent, and the views, going back to everything being political, the views have to be really represented. So our neighborhood associations, we got to figure out a way to make sure that we're including more residents, more renters, more tenants, more black folk, more people who are usually left out of decision making have to be engaged in those neighborhood associations. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so this may be a statement that people don't like, but participating in your neighborhood association is a place of privilege. And I don't think people are able to reflect on that because you have kids and, you know, you have a few jobs just to make ends meet. You might not be available every third Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m. or, you know, every 2 weeks, and you won't be able to have access to be able to pay dues. And I think that neighborhood associations should reach out to their neighbors and ask them what works for them. And there should be more inclusion in that way with the meetings.
Yeah. I mean, straight up, if you're charging fees in a neighborhood that has a high percentage of poverty, you're not doing it right. And you're really just saying to the people who are already marginalized, you don't matter and you can't participate. So it's really important that we have low barrier for people to participate. And if we can make anything more low barrier in our office, let us know that. I think mid last year, we realized some of our like monthly meetings weren't working out time-wise for folks. So we put out a survey and we, started to ask people we engaged with, when should we have these? And now the new time and the new day that we have monthly just was the overwhelming response that we got. And we make sure that, like I said, you can call in, you can video in, you can stream it later on Facebook, and you don't even need to have a Facebook account. Of course, if you don't have access to internet, that phone is really essential. And if you don't have access to any of it, which is rare for most folks that we come into contact with, going back to being involved in a group is really important because you can share that info out with people. Let's talk about the contacting or writing letters, emails, phone calls for government officials. As an activist / organizer, I thought that this was the most impactful way to influence decision making. You flood that inbox, you flood that phone. But being in office, I got a whole new perspective because what you realize is, I said traffic jam. You jam up that office with a bunch of calls, a bunch of emails, usually for a decision that I or maybe another elected official, a decision that we've already made, like housing. That is a really important issue for our district: affordable, sustainable, beautiful, comfortable housing. I'm an advocate for that. I support that. When we were going back and forth about American Rescue Plan money, I received a lot of emails saying, hey, you should support X amount of dollars for affordable housing. And I don't think a lot of those folks knew, hey, I'm actually leading this effort to push for this funding for housing. But I try my very best to email everybody back, unless it's like crazy amount of mass emails and it's just like physically impossible for me to do so. But we did some studying on our own about what is most impactful. And we looked at a study that was actually for Congress, but very relevant to Metro Council. And it showed that those mass form emails, those one-click advocacy emails, were the least impactful way to advocate when it came to influencing decisions of elected officials. And the top most impactful way was meeting with representatives of constituents, of voters, neighborhood associations, advocacy groups. So writing letters is really important, but if you can make them personal to your own personal, experience, that would be much more impactful to me than you sending a copy and paste email that 100 other people have sent that at this point I'm probably not going to open and read. Also keep in mind that when you send those copy and paste emails, you're spreading your power out, you're diluting your power. Now, if it's in a petition, that's easy to consolidate. But when you just send it, across a time period, your power isn't necessarily felt if it's not being counted. So that's really important to keep in mind as well. Anything to add to that?
I was going to say, before you contact an official, whether it be phone, email, or whatever, make sure you know who you're contacting, as in know what their job is. A lot of people hit us up and they want to speak to Councilman Arthur, and I have to remind them he's a legislator, which doesn't go over well. But that's still what his job is. So when you do reach out to your elected officials, make sure you know what their job is. And to elaborate on those emails, usually I get the emails and I do recognize them as spam. In my opinion, they're not personalized. We really want to hear from you as the constituent in Louisville, or even sometimes I get emails from people who are not in Louisville, but we still want to hear from you, not a copy and pasted message.
King said it best. Very long time ago, he was talking about how we don't necessarily want to intimidate, but we want to articulate. You shouldn't have to intimidate a politician for them to do what's necessary to help their constituents. But how do you articulate an issue so well and with just so much persuasion that they are really forced to move on it? They are forced to take action. Hopefully the action that's going to be the most impactful in the way that you wish for them to take action. That's really important, because as we get into this new social media, TikTok viral era, I see a lot of folks engaging with politics in a way that's like just so extreme. and people are trying to get clicks and comments and engagement. And even that is soaked in privilege. You can't run up on everybody, and not anybody can run up on everybody. You run up on me, that might be a different outcome than running up on somebody like, let's say, Stuart Benson. Or depending on who you are, what you look like, what color your skin is, you can't just run up on a politician. You might get tackled, or worst case scenario, dealt with in a way that's going to result in even more clicks and engagement. So we got to understand how to engage with discipline. Volunteering with nonprofits is another example we used of civic engagement. And I challenge the volunteers, but also the nonprofits, to get political. That doesn't mean endorsing candidates, which more than likely, if you're a 501c3, you cannot do. That means if your nonprofit is dedicated to helping people who are unhoused, who are experiencing houselessness, then what can you do to help advocate for more affordable, sustainable housing? What can you do to help advocate for more mental health services? What can you do to help advocate through policy to address the issues that the people your nonprofit is serving face? Because every nonprofit should essentially have the mission to close one day because you address the issues. We should not have a coalition for the homeless forever. One day, hopefully, that organization is not needed anymore. So how can we get our nonprofits to really understand that their advocacy is important, and not just when there's a grant on the line? When you come and advocate, it shouldn't just be for your individual nonprofit. You should be thinking about meeting the needs of the people that you serve in general, whether it's your nonprofit or not. Another example we talked about was getting people registered to vote. And one of my favorite analogies of get out the vote or voter turnout was by Jesse Jackson when he ran for president. I forgot if it was the first or the second time, but he used the analogy of David and Goliath, and how, David killed this giant with a little stone, with a little rock. And he just kind of had this parallel between that rock and that potential, that little rock slaying this giant, and he called voting or being registered to vote stones on the ground if you don't pick it up and use it. And he talked about all of these different races where people lost, and how they lost automatically just because there weren't enough people registered to vote, or who were registered and didn't turn out to vote. And we can use that analogy for any of the upcoming races. Whatever side you're on, if you have people who are not registered to vote and they don't then register and then actually vote, it's almost like you silence yourself. The primary election, Louisville had a 20% voter turnout? Tens of thousands of people who did not let it be known which candidate they supported, which policies they supported. And it's so crucial to make sure that as you engage in the political process, electoral politics, that you're bringing other folks along with you. Even like right now is important as we talk about all of the political issues and rights literally being stripped away from people that have been established for over, generations. You can do something about that. It's literally on the ballot in November. Vote no. You can also think about voter registration in lines with the people who recently just got rights restored. I think over, 175,000 Kentuckians that have rights restored to vote, and that absolutely should have a say in the electoral process, who did their time and now can practice what we call democracy. Their voices should be heard. And there are so many issues impacting them that they have different life experiences in, that they can participate in now and say, this is how we feel, and this is the candidate or the policy that we support, and we want to make sure there's a different outcome for us.
Along with getting people registered to vote, making sure that they do vote is very important, like Councilman Arthur said, but that means making sure that they have something to vote for and relating politics back to voting in their life.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't think about how everything is political. Earlier I mentioned the gas prices, and I mentioned, going to the grocery store. I don't know about y'all, but I went to that grocery store recently, and that killed me out all the way. That's political. It's wages and the way people are living, in some cases not living. That is very much so political. And we got to do a better job at connecting the dots for some folks. I had a phone conversation with somebody earlier who was talking to me about how can we, use this event to motivate people to vote. And I said to them, I don't know what's more motivating than the fact that we're dead broke, the fact that we can't afford gas, we can't afford groceries. What's more motivating than that when you have people on the ballot who are advocating to ending structural poverty, to addressing racism, to addressing X, Y, and Z issues? That should be the biggest motivation in the world, your personal lived experience and how much you are struggling. But again, we don't always understand how that's tied to politics. Sometimes we try to, they say, raise ourselves up by our own bootstraps. How do you say that to somebody who's bootless? Or in the cases of somebody who descends from chattel slavery, people who used to be the boot, used to be the tool that others used to thrive in life. So we got to connect the dots when it comes to voting. Our sixth example was showing up to government meetings. Now, like I said, that doesn't mean showing up to every single meeting. That is impossible. I can't show up to every single meeting. Even the committees that I'm on, something will always come up. But how do you use your power as voters, as constituents, as residents, and identify like this person cares about housing? So maybe this person is watching the community affairs meetings because they also deal with housing. This person cares about transparency in government. Maybe they're watching and paying attention to the government oversight committee meetings. This person cares about stopping violence. This person's watching the public safety meetings. And hopefully this person is multiple persons, and you can take turns engaging in those meetings. You can take turns sharing information from those committees back with others. You can take turns keeping up with the policy that's being discussed in those committees and taking a stance on those policies. In some cases, you can even show up and speak for or against those policies in front of Metro Council, in front of the actual committee. There's so many different ways to show up in terms of showing up to meetings. But please make sure that when you do that, you are prepared. And I mean prepared not only in the sense of you coming to government official meetings and preparing your remarks and what you want to say and how you want to say it, but also if you call an elected official or an agency, a department head or a worker from government into a meeting that you host, have an understanding of what their job is, what you want to say, who is going to say it, how you say it. There's nothing wrong with practicing that. It's really important because what it does is it creates a much more efficient meeting, and hopefully that efficiency leads to a much more effective meeting so that your outcomes are actually what you want them to have.
I just think it's really important to show up before the vote. If you only show up during a vote, I can promise you are almost going to change absolutely no person's mind that's going to be voting by chanting or holding up signs. And furthermore, when you do show up at the vote with those signs, which I do encourage, leaving when that vote is read, if it's not in your favor, is childish. I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to say it any other way, but you have to be more serious about politics. If I left after every single thing was passed that I didn't like, I would not be in this job at all, period.
Yeah, going back to the basketball analogy, you lose a game, you still got to show up for that next game, or at least you should show up for that next game. Taking an L one time doesn't mean, you know what, we should just give up, never engage again. We're just going to keep taking L's. If that's the attitude you have a lack of something called faith. And a lot of times, we don't understand faith in the larger sense of the word faith. We might think of like spiritual faith, religious faith. But a spiritual mentor, somebody I look up to in this city, Dr. Kevin Cosby, also the president of the school that I teach at, our only HBCU, Simmons College, he talks about faith in simple ways. When you drive down the street, you practice faith, because the only thing dividing you between oncoming traffic sometimes is a little paint in the middle of the road. Or when you're on an elevator and you go up in one of those towers downtown, you in this box, you in this compartment, and you just got a little rope holding you up. That is faith. You are having faith in something. You put your kids on that bus. You're having faith that they're going to come back safely. When you vote for somebody, you're putting your faith in them. So having faith in what you believe in is equally as important because it keeps you coming back and coming back and coming back. My ancestors who were enslaved, in some cases going through so much evil, all they had was faith. And that faith told them that one day they will get free, and they fought for that freedom, and they're still fighting for some sort of freedom in this country. But if we don't hold on to faith, we essentially don't hold on to anything, and we don't have anything. So that faith is really important. Serving in government was another example that we talked about. And I know I talked about like being hired and like literally serving in government. But serving in government, going back to the advisory council concept that we talked about earlier, means that. It means showing up to these monthly roundtables that we have, giving us your opinion about policy. Hell, even responding to some of the surveys, the American Rescue Plan survey, the budget survey, responding to that is an example of serving. That's service. You're providing something for us, for you, for our city. Really important. But if you do want to actually work in government, LouisvilleKY.gov, top of the website, jobs. You can also find contact information for different agencies, different council offices, a lot of information on that city website. And if there's ever a way for us to set it up to navigate it better for you, please let us know. 8, giving feedback to government. When you look at the American Rescue Plan survey results, it is very clear, as I said earlier, that housing was the number one priority for folks in this community. And then when you look at the dollars that we sent out the door, that we approved, that was the most funded priority. Those survey results had a direct impact on the decisions that we made in government. Sometimes people think filling out surveys, it just goes into the abyss and then nothing happens. That is not true. Please engage with any form of feedback that government has. And to make it better, to make engaging in that feedback better, we are working on a public participation ordinance that outlines the standards for public engagement. I believe that when we get feedback from residents, from voters, from constituents, we should always share that feedback back. We should put it back out so people understand what were the trends, what did masses of people want. We should also make sure that when we have an intake of that feedback, we know where it comes from. As simple as the council district or the zip code or the neighborhood, we should be able to look at a map and see where that feedback originated from. I also believe that there shouldn't be any confusion about how to engage in that feedback. You know, in years past, when you filled out the budget comment form, it might have just said, what do you think about the city budget? And then it was this blank box. If you've never opened that budget before or you don't understand the city budget, that comment form meant nothing to you. You know, you could put anything in there and then it just kind of goes off into the abyss. And then you have no idea what happens with the city budget until the city budget is passed. And that might piss some folks off. So we got to be a lot more transparent and explain how feedback works and how feedback impacts government decisions, which is exactly why we're working on this public participation ordinance, which will be linked in our weekly e-news, which we strongly encourage folks to sign up for and get engaged in, and also leads us to our number 9 example, which is being subscribed to City News.
So you can subscribe to our newsletter at louisvilleky.gov/district4. And if you need help navigating that, you can give us a call at 502-574-1104, and I'll gladly help you.
And all the council offices kind of have the same format for a number. So, you know, we're in District 4, so the last two digits are 04. If you're in District 25, the last two digits are 25. 574-11, and then the district number. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind, as you subscribe to that newsletter, open it. What's our open rate? Like,
it's extremely low.
You know, it's
so actually read what you're signing up for.
Yeah. Actually read it.
Yeah, and I can't speak on no other council districts' newsletters, but when we came into office, we wanted to make ours as short, sweet, and simple as possible. So, you know, at the top, you're going to usually see some sort of brief from me, like, hey, this is what's going on, this is on my mind, this is what you should watch out for. And then we get into like these different sections around civics, oddly enough. Of course, you know, I talk about the policies that we're working on. We get into community events that are happening. We get into what's happening within Metro government, any announcements that people should be aware of. But we try not to throw absolutely everything into the newsletter because it can get overwhelming for someone. It can get overwhelming. We don't put every single word from a press release. We might put the brief. If you want more info about it, click here and go over there and read it. But we try to just make it as digestible as possible because government is overwhelming for me. And as somebody who works through government, not for, I don't work for the government. I work for you who lives in the city, who works in the city, who thrives in the city. I work for you. As someone who works through government, I don't understand everything in government. So it's really important that we try to make things as low barrier as possible because you are our bosses, the people who subscribe to that newsletter, our constituents. We work for you through government, and we have to understand what you like, what you don't like, what you're for, what you're against.
That's one thing I really appreciate about Councilman Arthur. People don't understand government. I think he's made it as simple as possible, and he's very transparent because I promise you, some stuff he talks to me about, I'm so lost. But then I just start reading what he wrote, and then I'm like, oh, that makes sense. He just kind of brings politics back to people, and I think that's what it was meant for.
I try, but sometimes I fail at that as well, like connecting the dots for folks when it comes to political issues and what the solutions could be for us. But making sure you're engaged in government, as we talk about civic engagement, giving that direct feedback is really key. And I want to follow up on something I said. The constituents are our bosses. Individual constituents, going back to building power, are our bosses. But the truth of the matter is all of the constituents are our bosses. So we in the office have to build as much consensus because there's 30,000 of you, one of me, and I have to take your consensus, your wants, your needs, your desires, your concerns, and consolidate that into a single vote in that city hall chamber. And that's never really easy. Sometimes it's easier, but it's never really easy. I have to consolidate your vote and put it into one decision to represent as many constituents as I possibly can. But I'll also say this, because I believe leadership and finding consensus is really important. But even more important than that, in some cases, is molding consensus. Because I'm sure abolishing slavery, as we know, because the country broke in half and a war was fought, people died and bled over this, abolishing slavery, there wasn't a massive consensus in that. It required some people who said this ain't right to fight against it, abolishing segregation, Jim Crow. So some issues, even if all of our constituents said, you know what, we should start a war and secede from the city of Louisville and we should go to war with everybody. I don't believe our constituents believe that. But if they did, instead of searching for their consensus, sometimes I got to try to mold consensus, and I got to stand for what's moral and what's just and what's right, as opposed to just what's popular, because that's essentially what consensus is. And then last but not least, on our examples, we talked about getting involved with advocacy groups. There are so many, and I'm just going to share a few, elaborate a little bit on what they do. But again, there are so many, and if you know of some, I strongly encourage you to look them up for yourself. In some cases, you might have to create one if your issue is not being addressed. But I'm looking at the University of Louisville's Ann Braden Institute for Social Justice Research Center, and they list community and campus organizations that are fighting for civil rights, that are fighting for justice. Of course, there are some at the University of Louisville, like the Ann Braden Center. They have an LGBT center. They have a peace program, the Louisville Women's Center. And those groups, pretty obviously in the names, are fighting for specific causes. You also have some Louisville groups, outside of the University of Louisville, such as the Center for Health Equity within Louisville Metro government, that releases a health equity report that really dives deep into how people are living in this city, how people are dying in the city, and what we should do about it. You also have the Fairness Campaign that is fighting really hard to create fairness not only in Louisville but across Kentucky for the LGBTQ community. You have the Home of the Innocents, Interfaiths to Peace. You have the Jewish Voice for Peace. You have the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. You have so many groups that are fighting the fight on a daily basis. And going back to what I said about volunteering with nonprofits, sometimes that nonprofit isn't just, the charity that you see that's serving food on Sundays. Sometimes it's the groups that are working on policy, like some that we just listed out. You also have groups that are fighting in the region, fighting across the Commonwealth, and then some fighting across the country. And those groups are doing so much work, and I know they always need more people to work with them and volunteer with them and get engaged with them, because they are currently civically engaged. In some cases, they just need more folks to pull up on them. You know, we have a number of ways that we try to reach out to folks. Of course, you can reach out to us, but we also try to reach out to you. Of course, we have our weekly newsletter, which we talked about earlier, louisvilleky.gov/District 4 to find the link to sign up for that. You can get an email or you can get a text, and we're working on a voice broadcast system where you'll get my baritone voice in your ear probably every month saying, hey, this is what's going on. This is what we're working on. Tell us what you think about it. What do you like? What do you don't like? And that'll be coming out soon. We also have our monthly roundtables every third Tuesday, 6 to 7 p.m. You can stream it live on Facebook. You can also video in with us. You can also call in with us, and those will be happening every single month. It's an open invite forever, as long as we're here in this office, to just come and talk to us about the work that we're doing. Of course, we go out into the district at a number of community events, but outside of those events where people are already gathered, we come straight to you where you live. We canvass, we knock on your door. I'll never forget, we were just in an apartment complex maybe about a month or so ago, and we knocked on somebody's door. And when we meet our constituents, you know, we make sure we have their contact info updated. We try to get them signed up for our newsletter. But this gentleman was saying, yeah, I don't have a phone. I don't have a device or the internet. And the only way to connect with him was to show up at his place. And that's where we are with some folks. That's the reality of some people in this city. And we have to figure out a better way to reach them, because their voices are so important. In fact, I would say their voices in some cases is more important than the people who can reach us, because they've just historically been ignored. We also phone and text bank. So we might be calling you, we might be texting you. Don't be afraid to talk with us. It's important to share with us what we should be doing as we work for you. And then we share some updates every now and then on social media. You can follow me, Jecorey Arthur, JECOREYARTHUR, or the district social media page, which is Lou District 4. And that's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Hit us up. We do not do private messages, direct messages, so please make sure you're using the proper channels. Because of open record laws in Kentucky, we have to make sure we use the proper channels. And it's a lot easier to connect you to a city department in an email or on the phone than it is in a Facebook message. Because, you know, Jeff Brown at Public Works, we probably can't add you in a Facebook message with him, but we can connect you via email with him. So it's really important to know how to engage with our office. And those are just, you know, the main ways that we try to do outreach. But there are some other ways as well. And we welcome any and all participation in what we do. I truly believe that a more informed people, a more involved people, will result in a more incredible people. And that's what we want. We want incredible people all over the city. And I know we have the power to do it. We just got to work on it.
Can you touch on the mailer we sent out?
Absolutely. So we sent out a mailer to all, 14,000 households in the district and 11,000 something businesses in the district. All 30,000 of those constituents that I referenced earlier should have received this mailer. And that mailer just has some information about who we are, you know, the neighborhoods in our district, the work that we do in the district, and how you can get engaged with us. We reference the monthly roundtable. We have our contact information for you to subscribe to the newsletter. So please keep that mailer just in case you need to know how to contact us, how to engage with us. Because as I said, we work for you, but I believe our work is a lot better when we work with you.
I think this is so exciting to talk about. Because this kind of gets at the heart, really, of why we started this podcast anyway, and being able to encourage and educate and make this city more
involved, informed, incredible.
Well, thank you both so much for being here.